Do you ever feel like you're just living by the clock? You know, that internal calendar is always ticking, telling you you're behind, maybe you're not productive enough.
Yeah, that constant pressure.
Exactly. And that everything worthwhile has to be done through, like, sheer force, linear effort.
Hmm.
It feels like this battle we all fight, you know? Are we living by these rigid logical rules, or is there maybe something else, a hidden, more fluid, uh, almost magical reality?
Like a way of effortless creation that maybe we've been taught to ignore.
Yes, exactly that.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. That's precisely the conflict we're exploring today.
We've got some really fascinating source materials.
We do. It's profound and honestly pretty challenging stuff. We're looking at the sessions channeled through the late Jane Roberts with really helpful notes from her husband, Robert F. Butts. The book is The Magical Approach. Seth speaks about the art of creative living.
Right. And this material, it mainly comes from sessions back in late 1980.
Right.
And I'd say it's not just self-help, you know. It's more like a whole different operating system for how we think and live. Okay, so what's our mission here? What are we trying to unpack for you, the listener?
Well, we really want to get into Seth's core idea, which is, frankly, pretty revolutionary.
Which
That the natural person is inherently the magical person.
Ah.
And we want to show you how understanding this deep duality is maybe the key to, well, effortless creative living, and maybe even surprisingly to physical healing and just better daily functioning.
That's a big claim. Physical healing, too.
It's in there, yeah. But first, I think it's really essential to talk about the medium, how this information even came through.
Jane Roberts, right? Or Rubert, as Seth called her.
Exactly. She spoke for this energy personality essence, Seth, while she was in a very focused trance-like state.
But not unconscious.
No, that's the interesting part. She described herself as conscious, but operating at a different level.
Yeah.
Highly creative, highly energized. Her husband, Rob, he described it vividly, didn't he?
Yeah, he said it was like riding some perfect, gigantic ninth wave of energy.
What a description. And the way the information itself was delivered, spontaneous, super creative, outside ordinary linear thinking, it perfectly mirrors the kind of nonlinear reality Seth is actually talking about. The medium reflects the message.
Okay, so let's unpack that core duality then. The rational way of thinking versus this magical orientation.
Right. Seth is really insistent on this point.
Yeah.
The magical approach, let's call it the MA. It's not some secondary thing. It's not like some extra woo-woo add-on to life. Okay. He says it's actually a more basic, more organic, and fundamentally natural part of being human.
More natural than being rational. That sounds counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But Seth defines the MA as basically man's version of the animal's natural instinctive behavior in the universe.
Okay, like how an animal just knows what to do.
Precisely. Think about a bird building a nest or a deer navigating the forest. They don't pull out a spreadsheet, right?
Oh, they just do it.
They just know. And the MA, Seth says, operates with this magical ease and genuine effortlessness.
Which is the total opposite of how our culture tells us things work.
Absolutely. It's a sharp contrast to that culturally mandated idea that you have to struggle, use willpower, grind it out continuously to achieve anything valuable.
Yeah, the no pain, no gain mentality.
Exactly. The magical approach suggests that actually fulfillment happens naturally, spontaneously. That mechanism is just built into how existence works.
And this conflict really shows up in how we think about time, doesn't it?
Oh, massively. Seth talks about two faces of time, but our society really only rewards one. Let's start with the one we all know too well. Assembly line time.
Yeah, assembly line time. It's that culturally added idea, isn't it? Clocks, minutes, moments, hours, all artificially laid right over nature's own complex rhythms.
Like a grid placed on top of a flowing river.
That's a great way to put it. And Seth points out, this structure, it works perfectly for an industrialized commercial society. You know, a society focused on mass production, efficiency.
Partialities, bits and pieces, assembly lines, promptness of appointments, as he puts it. Exactly. And he notes pretty critically, I think, that this whole framework was initially set up specifically to cut down on spontaneous impulse.
Really? To suppress creativity.
Well, to standardize things, to get a mass-produced version of reality where everything is measurable, predictable.
Okay, so that's assembly line time. What's the alternative?
The other face is natural time or creative time. This operates by the Earth's own rhythm. Think seasons, tides, your own internal cycles.
More fluid.
Much more fluid. And Seth says this time is far richer. It doesn't just march forward. It turns inward, outward, backward, forward. It folds in on itself.
So how does that relate to creativity? Because you still need time to, say, write something.
Absolutely. Your creative output still appears within that consecutive assembly line time. You need minutes to type, minutes to paint. But Seth argues the main work, the generative work, the really effective stuff
Yeah.
that's done outside that linear framework entirely.
In that richer natural time.
Yes. And what's really fascinating here is that this magical approach, it's absolutely not irrational in the way we usually think of irrationality.
It's not just random.
Not at all. It actually follows a superior kind of logic. Seth describes it as gathering all of experience together, conscious, unconscious, physical, non-physical, and transforming it directly into seamless action.
Okay, how does that work? What's this natural reasoning?
Well, think about your own body's operations. How does it digest food? How does it heal a cut?
It just
Does it?
automatically.
Right. Your body reasons incredibly quickly, clearly, concisely. It's deductions, it's logic. It's far too fast and complex for our slower, linear intellect to follow consciously.
So that's the magical reasoning he talks about.
Yes. It instantaneously transforms vast amounts of complex data into direct, appropriate action, like keeping your heart beating or fighting off an infection. It doesn't need conscious deliberation for those core functions.
And I love how he connects this right down to the cellular level.
Yeah, in session 3, he basically says this logic is inherent in every single organism, that each cell believes in a better tomorrow.
Wow.
And that each cell contains an inherent understanding of its own inevitability, its own drive towards continuation. It's like a built-in faith, a deep, pervasive logic guiding life towards growth, regardless of what the conscious mind is worrying about.
It's a kind of profound unconscious trust then.
Exactly. Which leads to the big question, right? If this inherent magical logic exists, if we're fundamentally built for effortlessness and fulfillment, why do we struggle so much?
Yeah, why is life often so hard?
And the answer, according to Seth, which brings us to our next point, lies in the severe limitations we impose on ourselves through our overstressed, isolated intellect.
Okay, so the problem isn't the intellect itself.
No, not that we use it. The problem is that we rely on it almost exclusively, shutting out all those other more fundamental ways of knowing and operating.
And Seth defines the intellect as...
Specialized. Highly specialized, yes, and prejudiced, inflexible. And crucially, he notes it's much more socially oriented than usually understood.
What does that mean, socially oriented?
That's key. The intellect, especially in its highly developed state, is primarily geared towards helping us translate our spontaneous inner urges and purposes into what's considered the proper social and cultural context.
It's a tool for fitting in, for navigating the cultural assembly line.
In large part, yes. More than it is for navigating the raw, natural world directly.
And this specialization, this focus on fitting things into cultural boxes, that leads to problems.
It leads directly to what Seth calls a fractured view of reality. Because the intellect loves categories, loves to specialize, we end up with all these separate, isolated disciplines, biology over here, physics over there, psychology somewhere else.
Each guarding its own facts.
Jealously guarding them, yeah. And Seth warns this means science, for example, can offer no even, suggestive, hypothetical, comprehensive ideas of what reality is, simply because it refuses to bridge those artificial intellectual gaps it created.
Wow. And that leads to isolation. Pessimism.
Exactly. That's the biggest trap. When the intellect is isolated, psychologically isolated, cut off from the body's wisdom, isolated in time and space, it gets frightened. It becomes paranoid.
Why? Why frightened? The reason, Seth states pretty chillingly, is simple. The isolated intellect, operating only on linear time and sensory data, cannot perceive events until they have already happened. It's always reacting, never anticipating from a deeper level.
Right. So its default setting, its survival mechanism when it feels alone and cut off, is to fear the worst possible outcome. It prepares for threats it can only see after they've arrived.
And we often mistake that kind of fearful, worst-case scenario thinking for being realistic or mature, don't we?
We do. Seth calls that thin, cold rationality a fake veneer. It's like a protective shell covering up the deeper, spontaneous, and actually profoundly positive rationality that is the real basis for the intellect in the first place. We've mistaken the tool for the whole mechanism.
Okay, so if we rely only on this isolated kind of fearful intellect, how does that affect how we solve problems?
Well, inevitably we choose the wrong way. The default rational approach, the RA, insists that to solve a problem, what must you do?
Focus on it. Concentrate on it really hard.
Right. Concentrate upon it. Project its potential disastrous effects way out into the future, and just ruminate endlessly on all the negative consequences.
That sounds familiar. And exhausting.
It is exhausting. And
Yeah.
Seth calls this the concentration trap. This intense mental focus brings about what he calls mechanical repetition,
Also.
because the intellect is a fantastic organizer. Once you give it a negative focus, this problem is terrible, this might happen, it starts to almost hypnotically collect only the evidence that proves that pessimistic point.
So it filters reality.
Completely. Any valid, actual physical evidence of improvement or success or things working out with that magical ease, it gets discarded, ignored, thrown away. Why? Because it doesn't fit the predetermined negative picture the rational mind is building.
Wow. It actively works against seeing the positive.
Yes.
Seth gives this powerful analogy in session 8. Think of a paranoid government.
If the governing force, let's say that's your conscious intellect, is paranoid and focused only on potential threats, what does it do?
It overestimates the dangers, builds up defenses.
Massively overestimates dangers, yes.
Right.
It leads to huge overmobilization, tons of energy spent purely on defense, constant vigilance.
Which takes energy away from everything else.
Exactly. It drains resources and energy directly away from other essential projects. Now, in the individual psyche, where is that energy taken from?
From creativity, healing, joy.
Precisely. Spontaneous healing, natural joy, creative activity. It becomes an internal resource war, basically started by fear.
That connection is really crucial. It's not just abstract philosophy, it's about actual physical and mental energy.
Yes. And this intellectual framework, this RA, causes particular distress for anyone who considers themselves a creative person. We talked earlier about how the rational framework was set up partly to cut down on impulse.
Right, to standardize things.
Well, trying to fit the spontaneous thrust of creativity, which naturally follows those earth rhythms, the seasons, the tides, trying to cram that into the rigid assembly line time structure. Seth says that's bound to lead to conflicts, dissatisfactions, and frustrations.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
If you're a writer or a painter or a musician.
Yeah.
That cultural idea that each minute is valuable gets twisted, doesn't it? It translates into this unreasonable demand. Each minute must be a minute of production. No time for just being or letting ideas percolate.
Exactly. It forces the spontaneous, creative self into these rigid artificial restraints. It feels unnatural because it is unnatural.
So the natural person, the magical person, they operate differently.
Completely. That part of you knows how to gather creative insights from everywhere, chance encounters, even household chores, mundane activities. It knows how to enrich itself physically and psychologically through just living.
And it doesn't like being forced onto a schedule.
It deeply dislikes being told it must work on a rigid schedule under those unreasonable restraints. True creativity, Seth insists, comes from enjoying the moments, which then naturally fulfill themselves.
And a key part of that is relaxation, letting go.
Absolutely vital, often ignored, but vital. The art of relaxation, he calls it. It's the letting go that actually triggers the magical activity.
Because it allows the body's faster logic to take over.
Yes, it releases the energy that the paranoid intellect was hoarding for defense, hoarding against those imagined future threats.
Okay, this is fascinating conceptually, but let's get into the evidence. Because Seth doesn't just state these ideas, he backs them up, right?
Yeah.
Using Jane and Rob's own experiences.
He does. And this is where the philosophy becomes, well, harder to dismiss. We need to look at how this duality actually operated in their daily lives. Seth uses specific, sometimes startling, and deeply personal examples from their shared life to show this magic in action.
Okay, what's the first piece of evidence?
A really classic example of what they called instant feedback, the camera incident.
Right, I remember this one. Jane was just thinking about asking Rob to take a picture.
Yeah, she was sitting in her studio, just idly thinking it might be nice to have a snapshot of the kitchen table scene, maybe for painting inspiration, something like that, just a fleeting thought. She didn't say anything out loud. Less than 2 minutes later, Rob shows up at her studio door, completely unannounced, holding his camera.
Which he hadn't used in ages.
Not for months. And he wasn't there to photograph the kitchen. He was ready to take a snapshot of her.
Wow. That's pretty direct.
Isn't it? They were genuinely amazed by the, quote, magical ease of it. And Rooney had been fiddling with the camera at the complete opposite end of the house. There were no physical clues for Jane to pick up on.
So Seth saw this as proof of.
As a perfect, effortless demonstration of the magical orientation at work. It showed they were operating spontaneously, in precise correspondence with each other's minds, facilitating this intercommunication without needing words or linear time, just connection.
Absolutely. That's telepathy, maybe? What else?
Well, Seth uses another shared experience to teach a really profound lesson about the link between inner desire and outer reality. This involves a dream Rob had.
A dream. Okay.
He had this highly symbolic dream about their neighbor's dog, Gus. In the dream, Gus wanted food, so he comes up to their house, and he walks effortlessly through the closed glass storm door to get to the food inside.
Wait, just phases through the glass.
Exactly like that. Effortless penetration of a physical barrier.
Okay, so what's the symbolism there?
Seth uses that exact image as a metaphor for the magical approach. He explains that in the inner world, the generative world where things begin, desire is action.
Desire equals action.
Yes, and fulfillment happens without the kind of effort or resistance we expect in the physical world.
Right.
The physical world might need time or certain conditions to line up for the manifestation, but the desire itself is the engine. It brings about the results if you maintain that feeling of
Effortlessness, like the dog walking through glass.
Precisely. If you hold the desire without introducing the resistance of doubt or struggle.
That's a powerful idea. Wasn't there another detail in that dream? Something about the intellect?
Yes, very key detail. There was an observing Navy officer standing guard in the dream, just watching the dog pass through the glass.
Okay. Seth suggests this officer symbolized the rigid, rational self. But notice its role. It's just observing. It is stepped aside, relegated to its true, proper position, watching the magical proceedings without trying to impose impossible rational controls or say, hey, you can't walk through glass. The intellect as witness, not controller.
Exactly. Now, the evidence moves beyond just these immediate personal synchronicities into things like precognition, seeing the future, and the multidimensional nature of reality.
Okay, like the Brenner pollution dream.
Yes. Another one of Rob's experiences. He had this vivid, detailed, colored dream. He saw his old neighborhood yard, but it was horribly polluted with animal waste, industrial waste. Really unpleasant.
And this was significant because
it happened 13 days before a local newspaper article appeared detailing a major sewage settlement, including a financial award related to pollution problems in that exact location.
13 days before.
Wow. It's a perfect example of precognition bleeding into daily life. And Seth stresses the dream made its point, whether Rob consciously read the article later or not. The part of Rob that formed the dream, the magical, spontaneous self, already knew.
Knew about the pollution, the settlement, the article, even Rob's habit of reading that paper.
All of it. It demonstrates, Seth says, a psychological motion of natural, magical import. It shows that the rules of the rational, linear world are, in his words, filled with holes. Time isn't as solid as we think.
And this connects to creativity too, doesn't it? The triplets novel idea.
Yes, another fascinating one for Rob. He had this spontaneous creative flash, a reverie, really, for a novel plot. It involved a hospital baby mix-up, triplets separated at birth, and eventually reunited.
Okay, sounds like a decent plot idea.
Right. But almost immediately after having this internal creative idea, he went to get the newspaper he'd forgotten to bring in earlier.
Don't tell me. Front page story. Real-life triplets, separated, just reunited. No way.
Yes way. And Seth confirmed this wasn't just random coincidence. It was a precognitive trigger.
So the future event triggered the creative idea.
Exactly. The mind, the magical self, instantly picked up on the future news story and organized it creatively, turning it into the basis for a fictional project. It shows how that magical self synthesizes information across different time frames, past, present, and future.
Which beautifully illustrates Seth's point about how time actually flows.
Right, that future events cast their shadows back into the present, that we often act in relation to things that haven't technically happened yet in linear history.
He describes world events as living multidimensional novels.
Yeah, being constantly formed in the present, responding to triggers from both the future and the past. It's a much more dynamic picture of reality.
Okay, if the mind has this kind of power, seeing the future, connecting telepathically the implications for our physical bodies, for health, must be enormous.
Absolutely enormous. And this is where the evidence gets very personal and quite profound for Jane Roberts herself, especially regarding her physical struggles with mobility later in life.
Right, she had significant health challenges, but there were periods of improvement.
Yes. And Seth points to specific times where her physical condition improved markedly. She could take more steps walking, her knee movement got much better, discomfort lessened.
And how did this happen?
Seth insists it happened magically over weeks, primarily due to a shift in her attitude, her beliefs, and crucially, her allowing and encouraging motion rather than fearing it.
So going from barely managing a step or two.
To suddenly taking 10 steps or even more with significantly less discomfort than before, it was a dramatic shift.
And Seth's explanation wasn't just willpower or physical therapy.
He was very clear on that. He said the body's effort to recover, to heal, is as magical, as creative, certainly, as the writing of a book or a poem.
Wow. Healing as creativity.
Yes. The body's own ultra-fast reasoning transforms belief and intent into action. Its inherent logic guides the recovery far more effectively than any conscious step-by-step direction could. Jane was finally beginning to trust her creative and magical abilities, including the one naturally geared towards physical health and mobility, instead of viewing her physical self as just this separate, failing machine.
Trusting the whole
The whole self. And look, this magical orientation, it isn't just for big dramatic things like healing or precognition. They found it worked for mundane, everyday stuff, too.
Like putting a flea collar on the cat.
Exactly. Mitzi the cat. Apparently, previous attempts had been a total hassle, scratches, escapes, the whole 9 yards. A familiar struggle for any cat owner, right?
Relatable.
But then they decided to consciously apply the MA. They mentally intended that the whole affair would take place easily. They applied that desire's action principle to this tiny, annoying task. It worked. Much less difficulty, the collar went on smoothly. And Seth pointed this out in session 6 as a clear demonstration of mental work at other levels.
So the magical approach works for the small stuff, too. It's scalable.
Completely scalable. It works just as well for avoiding a cat scratching incident as it does for fostering major life changes or healing, provided the intellect steps back and trusts the effortless process, trust that desire is enough. Okay, that leads us perfectly into the final section then. Integration. If we accept this magical core, this MA, how do we actually live this way? How do we use our intellect properly without falling back into that paranoid, rational-only trap? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the key, Seth says, is redefining the intellect's role. It's not about throwing the intellect away. It's a valuable, specialized tool.
So what is its proper job?
Its proper job, its singular purpose in this context, is to make clear, concise decisions and, most importantly, to conceptualize goals, to define the target.
Okay, set the intention.
Exactly. Once that goal is clearly formed, it acts like a magnet. And at that point, the intellect's main job is kind of done.
Done. What happens then?
Then you trust the rest of you. You trust the body's magical properties, that spontaneous inner complexity, the ultra-fast magical reasoning. You trust that to handle the precise motion, the unfolding action, the how.
Seth uses that powerful archer analogy, right?
It does.
And it's perfect. Think of an archer. The archer's intellect focuses only on one thing, hitting the bullseye. That's the clear, defined goal. Okay.
Then the archer lets go. The body's innate magical coordination honed through practice, yes, but operating faster than thought handles the complex calculation of angle, windage, muscle tension, the precise moment of release.
The intellect doesn't micromanage the shot.
Exactly. The incorrect use, the rational trap, is when the archer's intellect shifts its focus from the target to all the different ways the arrow could go wrong.
What if I wobble?
Yeah.
What if the wind catches it?
Precisely. Introducing fear, doubt, second-guessing. That immediately spoils the spontaneous perfect action. The intellect starts trying to control something it's not equipped to control directly.
So defining the goal, then trusting the process.
Trusting the deeper mechanisms. And this relies heavily on, well, trust itself, and, critically, relaxation.
That art of relaxation again.
Yes. Seth observes that every creature, every baby, is born fundamentally trusting its environment, trusting the support it's been gifted. We learn distrust.
And relaxation is the key to tapping back into that trust.
It seems to be. That letting go, as discussed back in session 1, is what allows the magical activity to begin. Remember Jane needing to stop trying so hard?
Yeah, trying to prove that he could or should or must immediately begin another book.
Right. She needed to relax, to trust, and simply allow the creative moment, the next step, to fulfill itself naturally. Let the goal writing draw the means, inspiration, words to it.
Their own experiences with publishing seem like a great real-world example of wrestling with these ideas, especially belief systems and that rational trap.
Oh, definitely. Seth discusses their publisher, Prentice Hall, and points out something fascinating about the company itself. He sees it embodying a kind of creative tension.
How so?
Well, Prentice Hall published, on the one hand, very conventional establishment stuff, textbooks, academic works, representing that rigid, rational structure.
Okay.
But through its Parker Books division, it also published very anti-establishment, self-help, even occult-ish material. Two extremes under one roof.
Interesting. And where did Seth's books fit in?
Seth notes that his own books, published in the main trade division, acted almost like a bridge between those two extremes. They showed that the magical self, these deeper ideas, could operate effectively within and connect seemingly opposing structures.
But Jane and Rob still fell into the rational trap sometimes, didn't they? With
Yeah.
the Mass Events book.
Oh, yeah. Big time. A perfect example. They got incredibly worried about the publisher potentially adding a standard medical disclaimer to that book.
Okay, a disclaimer. Why was that such a big deal for them? Because they didn't just see it as a disclaimer on one book. They immediately fell into the RA pattern, projecting the threat into the future, imagining dire, continuous, retroactive consequences. They started thinking, if they put it on this book, they'll put it on all our books, past and future. It will undermine everything.
Focus on the potential problem, magnify it, project disaster.
Textbook case. Seth called it an excellent example of what not to do. He pointed out it was not reasonable logic to assume that one potential disclaimer on one book would suddenly be applied retroactively and continuously to all their other very different works.
It was paranoid reasoning, not factual reasoning.
Exactly. It was a conclusion based on fear, projecting a hypothetical negative future. The magical approach, he suggested, would be to realize that they and their work were inherently protected by their own creative intent and value, to act out of confidence in the goal, sharing the work, rather than fear of a hypothetical obstacle.
This idea of psychic creativity, the power of belief, gets expanded even further when Seth tackles religious concepts, doesn't it? Like the Christ drama.
Yes, dramatically. He explains that these great spiritual events, like the story of Christ, are essentially profound psychological dramatizations that touch history. They emerge from the collective psyche.
So he's saying it doesn't matter if the events happened exactly as written, literally, historically.
Precisely. He says it doesn't matter if they happened historically in every detail. What matters profoundly is that the belief happened, the psychological event happened, and shaped consciousness.
The impact is in the belief, the inner reality it created.
Yes, and the accomplishment, Seth says, is breathtaking in its grandeur. Why? Because it reveals the sheer scale of humanity's capacity for psychic creativity. Mankind collectively formed from its own psyche a multidimensional spiritual drama.
A drama more powerful than a literal event.
Infinitely more powerful and impactful, he argues, than any single, literal, physical, isolated event could ever be. It shows the immense power of the magical person, collectively and individually, to create realities through belief and inner experience.
So ultimately, embracing the magical approach is about reclaiming a bigger sense of self.
Exactly, reclaiming the entire self. Seth offers a pretty strong critique of modern psychology here. He argues it actually shrank our scope of identity by isolating man, primarily within this small sphere of the conscious, rational, waking mind, defined by contemporary scientific and psychological frameworks. He reminds us that historically, concepts like the soul were much larger containers.
Big enough to hold all the complexity.
Yes, big enough to contain man's entire complexity, the magical, the intuitive, the dreaming self, the physical body's wisdom, and the rational intellect, all part of one whole.
So the MA requires a fundamental shift in identity.
An entire reorientation, really.
Right.
It means enlarging the scope of who you think you are. It means learning to trust your feelings, your dreams, your intuitions, what Seth calls your magic hopes.
Seeing them not as weird extras, but as core parts of you.
As vital characteristics, not adjuncts, of personhood, as he puts it.
Yeah.
You have to consciously remember and value your natural person, not just identify solely with your specialized, socially oriented intellect. You have to allow those other, often dismissed parts to add their richness and wisdom back into your life, effortlessly.
Wow. Okay, well, that brings us towards the end of this particular deep dive. We've really explored how this so-called magical approach, the MA, might actually be our most natural, most effective way of operating.
Yeah, relying on that spontaneous action, that effortlessness, that deep-seated trust to fulfill desires, whether it's in creativity or health, or even just getting through the day with more ease.
The core idea seems to be that you're not fragmented. Your intellect, your creativity, your body, your intuition, they're all meant to work together, supported by this unified magical core.
A core that inherently trends towards growth and fulfillment. If, and it's a big if.
If you can just persuade the paranoid government of your conscious mind to stop hoarding all the resources for defense against imaginary threats.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. Let go of the fear-based control. Trust the flow.
Okay, so now, as always, we like to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something that builds on the material.
And this one comes from session 15. And it's about those cultural versus natural rhythms we talked about earlier.
Right.
Seth makes this fascinating point. Our modern society sections time arbitrarily, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
heavily centered around a daytime routine, dictated by the clock, by work schedules, very much a 9 to 5 kind of structure, even if your hours are different. But he argues early humans weren't exclusively daytime creatures like that.
Especially not in warmer climates.
Exactly. He suggests that in many places, early humans were often naturally nocturnal, or at least much more comfortable and active during the night. They used fire for light, sure, but they relied much more heavily on a blend of inner and outer senses, working in a more unified way during the darkness.
So what's the implication for us now?
Well, it suggests that the nightly parts of your personality, the less rigidly defined, perhaps more intuitive aspects,
Mm.
they might have become strangers to you simply because of our cultural conditioning about when life is supposed to happen.
We've just shut down those potentials because it's nighttime.
Potentially, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests you might have untapped freedoms, maybe even incredibly productive and spontaneous creative times
Mm-hmm.
available in your daily rhythm, including those late-night hours that you're simply not using.
Just because of a belief, a cultural belief about when things must happen.
Exactly.
Okay, definitely some food for thought there. What are your nocturnal capacities waiting to be explored? Perhaps there's a magical, effortless night of creative discovery just waiting? If you pause, relax, and let the archer trust the shot.
Maybe so.
Until the next deep dive, keep questioning the clock.